So, ladies and gentlemen, for our next guest, the former CEO of Hewlett-Packard, was a 2010 GOP nominee for the U.S. Senate in California, and is currently seeking the GOP nomination for President of the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please give a nice big round of applause to Carly Fiorina.
Good morning. Good morning. How's everybody? Love the sign. Thank you so much. You know, I'd like to start this morning in an unlikely place, perhaps, as we talk about practical federalism and our Constitution. I want to actually start in the slums of New Delhi, India. I am reminded of a trip I took there in January. Until I launched my bid for the presidency of the United States, I was privileged to serve as chairman of an organization called Opportunity International, the largest private microfinance organization in the world. We have lent $6 billion, $100 at a time, and lifted millions of people out of poverty. I traveled to New Delhi to meet with some of our clients. I don't know if you've ever been into the slums of New Delhi, but they're pretty grim. Mountains of trash, marauding animals, sewage in the streets, people piled on top of each other. And I went to meet with about 20 over the course of a day of our clients. Women who we had given a loan to, a small loan, so that they could begin a business, become entrepreneurs. Now, in this desperate set of circumstances, I expected to see desperate-looking people. And yet, the women I met, the clients I met, were clear-eyed. They looked hopeful, not hopeless. They looked determined. They looked focused. They were encouraged because somebody had taken a chance on them, giving them a helping hand. Let's face it, we all need that. I've needed people to take a chance on me. I've needed people to give me a helping hand. We all need that at some point in our lives. And because we had given them a chance, they had become entrepreneurs. And they were lifting themselves and their families and members of their community out of poverty. Now, why do I start there? Because the truth is, I have learned over the course of my life, and I have lived and worked and traveled, done business and charity and policy work all over the world. I have learned something that my mother taught me many, many years ago. My mother looked at me on a Sunday morning and said, "What you are is God's gift to you. What you make of yourself is your gift to God." And I've learned over the course of my life that everyone indeed has God-given gifts. I've learned over the course of my life that everyone has potential, usually far more than they realize. These women in the slums of New Delhi had potential. They had God-given gifts, regardless of their circumstances. It is worth asking, if everyone has God-given gifts, if everyone has potential, why is it that it is in this nation that more things have been more possible for more people from more places than anywhere else on earth? Why is it that it's only here, and truly it is only here, that a young woman could start out in the middle of a deep recession, typing and filing and answering the phones for a 9-person real estate firm, which is how I started my business career, go on eventually to become the chief executive officer of what we turned into the largest technology company in the world, and run for the presidency of the United States? That is only possible in the United States of America. Why is that? Why is it only possible here? It's only possible here because our founders knew what I have learned. Our founders knew everybody has God-given gifts. Our founders knew everyone has potential. Our founders knew also the abuse of power and its consequences. And so they founded this nation on an idea, a visionary, indeed radical idea. And they wrote a constitution to guard that idea against the abuse of power. And the idea was this: here you have a right to find and use your God-given gifts, to find and use and fulfill your potential. They express that right as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But what they meant was everybody has gifts and possibilities and potential, and so we are going to create a society in which everyone has a right to fulfill those possibilities. Now, we have had to work hard to make sure those rights apply to everyone. We have had to work hard to build a more perfect union, as Lincoln said. But nevertheless, more things have been more possible for more people here than anywhere else. And they went on. Here was the radical part of their idea. They said, not only do you have a right to do this, not only are we going to write a constitution to protect that right against the abuse of power, but they said that right comes from God and cannot be taken away by man or government. Ladies and gentlemen, I am running for the presidency of the United States because I believe we have come to a pivotal point in our nation's history. I believe we have come to the place where the possibilities for too many Americans, indeed the potential of this great nation, is being crushed by a government that has grown so big, so powerful, so costly, so complex, so inept, so corrupt, and a professional political class that refuses to do anything about it. The potential of this nation is being crushed by the government of this nation. And citizens, we must take our government back. There was this other idea, that ours was intended to be a citizen government. When did we get to the point where we thought that, only politicians can run for office? It is not how our nation was founded. Our nation was founded by men who did other things in their lives and then stepped forward for a period of time and served and then went back home. We have come to a place where our government, yes, you can applaud that. We've come to a place where our government is both inept and corrupt at what it is supposed to do, and inept and corrupt in doing things it is not supposed to do. And by the way, this is not a minority view anymore. 75% of the American people, as measured by Gallup, and Gallup has been asking this question for a very long time, 75% of the American people now think the federal government is corrupt. 52% of the American people now consider the federal government, I'm quoting here from the latest Gallup poll, an immediate threat. And 82% of the American people now think we have a professional political class that is more concerned about the preservation of its own power, privilege, and position than on getting anything done. Think about the things the government should be doing. Think about the things the government should be doing. The government should be securing the border. A government that cannot secure its border cannot protect its sovereignty. How long have we been talking about this, ladies and gentlemen? With all due respect, Donald Trump didn't bring this up. We talked about it in 2012, in 2008, in 2004, in 2000. In fact, we have been talking about an insecure border and a broken legal immigration system for 25 years. And it is not better, it is worse. We talk and talk, those politicians, but nothing ever really gets done. Here we now are cutting back on the military on the backs of a budget deal called sequester, which both Republicans and Democrats agreed to. We are cutting back on the capabilities of our military at just the time when the world is clearly a more dangerous and tragic place because we're not leading. For heaven's sakes, we cannot fire somebody at the VA for dereliction of duty, but we can lay off 40,000 soldiers? You're not crazy. This is insanity. This is not what our founders intended. Or here's another example. How long have we been talking about reducing the size and scope and power of the federal government? How long have Republicans been talking about this? And yet every single government agency grows bigger and bigger for every one of the last 50 years. We haven't reduced government spending ever. We have never. Can you think of a regulation we've repealed? Meanwhile, tax reform, yes, we talk about tax reform every election as well, but we now have a 73,000-page tax code. And of course, here's the truth. When government gets big and complicated and powerful, guess what? Only the big, the powerful, the wealthy, and the well-connected can handle it. It's called crony capitalism, ladies and gentlemen. Crony capitalism, when big, powerful, wealthy, well-connected interests use the complexity and power of government to feather their own nests and advance their own purposes. Whether that is writing Obamacare or writing Dodd-Frank or using the government, a commercial interest, an eminent domain to take away people's homes, as in the Kelo case, Vera Koking in Atlantic City, whose home was destroyed so that Trump casinos could build a parking lot for limousines. Big business and big government get together. And meanwhile, as the big, the powerful, the wealthy, and the well-connected take advantage of all this power and complexity, who is getting crushed? The small and the powerless. So we're destroying more businesses than we're creating for the first time in U.S. history. And that matters because it is small businesses, family-owned businesses, that create 2/3 of the new jobs in this country. They employ half the people. Most Americans start the way I did, in a little company, or the way my husband did, as a tow truck driver for a family-owned auto body shop. This government is tangling people's lives up in webs of dependence. We do not give people a helping hand or take a chance on them. We wrap their lives up in webs of dependence from which they cannot escape, generation after generation. And meanwhile, this government is inept at the things it's supposed to be doing. It is overreaching on things it should not be doing. Meanwhile, think about what's going on with our veterans. In a dangerous and troubled world, we have to have the strongest military on the face of the planet. Everybody has to know it, and that starts with caring for our veterans. Remember the Arizona wait time scandal? Remember we learned people and veterans were dying without an appointment? And bureaucrats in the VA were fiddling with the books to cover their tracks. And everybody got outraged because politicians will respond to pressure. And what happened? They passed a bill saying you could fire the top 400 senior executives at the VA if they didn't do their jobs. Great idea. Maybe we should do that all throughout government. But what happened? What happened? Nothing. One person got fired, the token gesture. But it's worse than nothing. In the last month, we have learned in an Inspector General's report that over 300,000 veterans have died before they ever received health care. This is a stain on our nation's honor. And do you hear anything from politicians? Not a word. Citizens, it is time to take our government back. Every single one of these problems that I've talked about can be resolved. We can secure our border. We know how. But it takes political willpower and leadership to get it done. Every wound we have is self-inflicted. But what we need is leadership that is prepared, that has the experience and the courage to actually challenge the status quo of Washington, D.C. And we need citizenship as well to help that leader. You know, Margaret Thatcher is a great hero of mine, and I'll close in just a minute or two so we can take your questions. But Margaret Thatcher is a great hero of mine, and she reminds us in one of her quotes about the difference between management and leadership. What's the difference between managers and leaders? I'll tell you who managers are. They're not bad people, not at all. It's just that managers operate within the status quo. They operate within the existing system, whatever it is. They don't really challenge it. And so they tinker around the edges of problems instead of actually solving them. What do leaders do? Leaders challenge the status quo because they know it is the only way to solve a festering problem, is to actually challenge the way things have always been. Just because something's been some way for a very long time doesn't mean it's right. People used to ask me, how did I go from secretary to CEO? The truth is, I didn't have a plan. But I would run to problems instead of running away from them. I would run to the challenge instead of running the other way. And every time I found a problem and a challenge, I found people who knew how to solve it. It's just they'd never been asked. And so what I would do is ask them and lead them to unlock their potential and actually solve the problem. So, I said leadership. It also takes citizenship. I'm going to ask you as citizens of this nation to help me as President of the United States, because the only way we can take our government back is to engage once again citizens in the process of their government. For a citizen government, it is a dangerous thing that 75% of the American people think the government's corrupt. It's a dangerous thing for a citizen government when 82% think we have a professional political class. What does that say? It says the vast majority of Americans, Democrats, Republicans, and independents alike, men and women, young and old, the vast majority of Americans have concluded that they have lost faith in the process of their governance and their politics. And we cannot let that stand. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to work with me, and I'm going to use technology as a tool to unlock your potential as citizens and to solve problems where we know the answer. So, for example, every Saturday in a weekly radio address, I'm going to ask you to take out your smartphones. By the way, if you have a flip phone, please upgrade. Seriously, it won't work on a flip phone. You have 15 months to do this. I know there are a lot of flip phones here in New Hampshire. I've seen them. In any event, I'm going to ask you to take out your smartphones, okay? And I'm going to ask you some basic questions because you know the answers. You know the answers. Example, why is it that government spends more money each and every year and yet never has enough money to do its duty? The government spends more money every single year, and yet when asked to do something important, care for our veterans, secure the border, build roads and bridges, what's the answer? Always. We need more money. How can that possibly be? Well, I'll tell you how it is. It's because we don't know where our money's being spent, so we can't ever prioritize it. So we need to go to some version of zero-based budgeting so we know where every single dollar is being spent. That is the only way you can spend less and prioritize. And you know how we're going to get that done? You're going to help me get that done. Because on a weekly radio address, I'm going to say, fellow citizens, please take out your smartphones. I'd like to ask you a question. Do you think it's important that we know where every dollar of your money is being spent? Press 1 for yes, 2 for no. This technology exists. You're going to press 1 because you know the answer. And when you press 1, along with tens of millions of your fellow citizens, Congress will feel the pressure. So all the way back to the difference between management and leadership and the importance of citizenship. And I will close with this. Margaret Thatcher once addressed her fellow countrymen and women at a pivotal point in her nation's history, and she said this: I am not content to manage the decline of a great nation. Well, ladies and gentlemen, neither am I, and I think we have been managing the decline of this great nation for quite long enough. Thank you very much. This must be the greatest century for the greatest nation in the history of the world, and with your votes and your support and your prayers, I am prepared to work with you, the citizens of this great nation, and lead the resurgence of a great nation. Thank you so very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Rock.